Good morning, students. This video is for Microsoft Excel. I know some of you are struggling a little bit with it, so I thought I would make this video and walk you through a couple of the things you can do in Excel. So first off, make sure you go to Brightspace, you download this. If you just go to the announcements, you should be able to get into the Microsoft Office. And if you go into content for Unit 2, descriptive statistics, you're going to look for the Excel workbook for Unit 2. It should say spreadsheet on it. It's the only spreadsheet in the Unit 2 folder. It should be pretty easy to find. If you just click on it, it'll open it up in a window, but then make sure you hit download to get it. Now, once you have it, you'll have this screen. There's a couple tabs at the bottom. You can see days, residency, blood type down here, texting, tuition, and cigarette. So I'm just going to run through each of these. We've done days a few times, but just as a reminder, we'll talk about formulas and then we'll move on from there. So a couple ways you could handle data is you could just count it by hand. One thing you might want to do then is if you select the first column of data, and you can select columns of data just by clicking right on the letter, for instance, A. It'll select the whole column. You can go to data. You can go to up here at the menu and go to sort over here. And once you do that, make sure it says my data has headers. If you click this, it'll show all the headers in the dropdown. If you don't have that clicked, it'll just say column A. And then we don't know what the values are. So if we do my data has headers, that means that first line it's not going to look at. It's going to be sorted by that particular column, in this case, day. And we can do an alphabetical order. So go ahead and hit OK. You'll see all of them relocate to the appropriate order. Friday comes first only because in the alphabet, F comes before all the other letters for all the other days. So we could count Friday here by hand. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. You could just type in 14 here once you counted it, but that's going to take a lot of time and effort. And if your data changes, it's going to be a problem. A better way to go about it is to use a formula. So I'm going to start with Friday since we know the answer is 14. We'll type in equal. The minute you type in equal, this fx pops up. It's because we're doing a function in Excel. So we're going to type in equal. And what we're looking for is a frequency, which means we're looking for a count of that day. So if you start typing in the word count, which is what you want, a lot of options will come up. Now, we want to count it only if it says Friday. So that says count if. So that's the one we're going to want. So we can type in count if, and then it pops up, it says counts the number of cells within a range that meet the given condition. So what that means is we're going to look through our data, we're going to look for the word Friday, and if it says Friday, we're going to count it as 1. So it should give us 14 for all of the different Fridays that are available. You're always going to need a parenthesis to start off your formula so that it knows what it's acting on. And then you're going to want your data. Now in this case, the data goes from A2 right here. And it goes all the way down. If you do a colon, you can scroll down and find out where it ends. It ends at A41. Remember, these are locations. So we're going to type in A41. And then if you look, all your data should be highlighted. Right? And that ensures that that's your data. You're going to put a comma because now that's the range. That's our data. The range is your data. And the criteria, you put a little quote, equal. And that just says, look for any time it says Friday. And make sure it has a capital F because it has to look exactly like these Fridays. If it differs in any way, it's not going to count it. What do I mean by that? I mean, if we have this, see how up here at the formula bar, it says Friday. If I make it a lowercase, oh, it's still counting them. So I guess it is case specific. Let's try. Yeah. See if it's typed incorrectly, then we have a problem. Sometimes it'll take lowercase, it seems, but not always. So I would just match it exactly if I were you. Now, for the other formulas, right, we can keep this one. Our data is never going to move. So what happens if we take this and over here we can copy it down? What's going to happen is if you click on this, so I clicked on this, I grabbed the little corner, and I just copied it down to Saturday. If you look right here, it now goes from A3 to A42. The reason it did that is because when I copied it and moved it down, it moved all of the formulas down. So the A2 and A41 didn't stay put. Now, there is a way to correct for that. What you can do is, in the original, you can use dollar signs. If you dollar sign the locations for all of the values, it'll hold those in place. So when you use a dollar sign, it locks it in place, and that's what we want. So you can lock that in place so that our data never moves. And if we copy this down, then we have a consistent formula. See how it hasn't moved? It still has the data, but it's still giving us 14 because here we have Friday. In order to change that, we can just type in Saturday, and that will look for all the Saturdays. You can always check it by hand to make sure. So right here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, so we know it's correct. And we can copy this formula for all of these just by grabbing that corner and moving it around. And here we just change all of the days to the right day. This one's Sunday. There were 3. Monday. Tuesday, I'm just going to fly through this. And this is Thursday. And then we have Friday, Saturday, and we're done. So those are all the days. And now for this frequency distribution, the other thing that we can do is get a total. And it's another formula. In this case, it'll be equal sum. And what you can do is in the parentheses, you can also click with your left mouse button and drag to select data. And that'll fill in what we did before. So that's D2 to D8. Close the parenthesis, and it'll give you a total of 40, which makes sense because there are 40 data points. Now I know it goes down to 41, but remember that the very first one is day, which is not one of the data points. So it's actually one less than the number here, if that makes sense, because that first one doesn't count. So there's actually 40, not 41 values. And that's it for formulas. We're going to do some more practice with formulas in the next one. We're going to go to residency. We're going to come up with the relative frequency. This is the second tab. And if you do relative frequency, you just select this. I'm just formatting. That's just bold to make it pretty. Now, relative frequency, if you recall, relative frequency is equal to the frequency for a specific value divided by number of total values. And what does that mean? That means if we do another formula, equal, we want 631 for Manhattan, and we want to divide it by a total. And we're going to hit return, and it gives us an error. And the reason for that is we don't have our total yet. You remember how to do total? I'm going to pause here for a second and give you a chance to try it. All right, so if you recall from what I just did, it's equal sum, and you can select all of the values. You can either click and drag, type them in. In this case, it's B2 to B9 are the locations. And you should get 6,225 for this value. And here it's about 10%, 0.10, 10%. And again, we want to copy this down, right? But when we do that, we get an error. Do you remember why? It's because, again, it moved. So luckily, what we wanted to move down from Manhattan to Bronx, but the total also moved. So we have to fix that in our original formula. So let's get rid of this one. If you go back up here, how do we lock in this one value on the bottom? Correct. Dollar signs lock in values so they don't shift when you highlight, copy, and paste them. So we're going to do $B, $10. That'll lock in the value there. And now we can copy to our heart's content and get all the other values. And here we see all of these values will add to 1. You can check, right? This isn't actually doing that. This is taking 6,225 and dividing it by itself. So let's try something. Let's try replacing this with an equal sum and make sure that all of these add to 1, because relative frequency should always add to 1 because it's all the possible values. And as you can see, even when we use this formula instead, we still get a value of 1, which means that the relative frequencies are being calculated correctly. Just for some fun and as an information point, you can select column C, and if you want a certain number of decimal points, you can actually change it by using these arrows right here. It'll either increase or decrease decimals. So if we select these values that are decimals, sorry, you can't click on C, you have to select just the values. Otherwise, the relative frequency will throw it off. If you select the values you want to change, you can either remove decimal places, which I would advise, because if you want to write it as a percent, you only want 2 decimal places. If you want to know the 10th of a percent, you could have 3. So let's put it at 2, and then these look like percents, and we can read them pretty easily. Again, you just hit the little arrows here, either to add more decimal places or remove decimal places. You could also format it as a percent here if you wanted. But I usually leave them as decimals. Now, let's practice one more formula, then we'll put in some graphs, and then I'm going to leave these other ones for you to try using all the skills we just developed. So on residency, let's do one more thing. Let's do cumulative relative frequency right here. Also, if it doesn't fit, see how it goes across 3 different columns? If you put your arrow between these two, D and E, and double click, it'll make it wide enough to fit whatever you just typed. Again, what you can do is if it's too small, you go between the 2 column names, D and E, double click, and it'll make it big enough. Same vertically. If this was too big, if I double click, it'll make it the size that fits whatever is written there. Now, cumulative frequency, in case you don't remember, to get the cumulative relative frequency, you have to start with the first one. So we're just going to grab the one directly to the left. And now cumulative relative frequency is equal to the sum of all relative frequencies up to and including a specific value. Now what that means is here we're going to add up all the ones starting from the top going down. Well, that's just that one. And now we're going to go for the next one. So if we do equal, we want this one and all that came before, right? Which would be right above because we've already added them together. So now we have C3 plus D2. We're going to hit enter. And now when we take this, let's copy it down once and see if it does what we want it to do, right? Sometimes we want the formula to shift. Sometimes we want to lock it. In this case, it shifted exactly where we wanted. It's the new value plus all the old values we already added. So the formula actually works really well here because as I move down, so does the formula. And we want that in this case. And you'll copy it down right to the last value. And by the time we get here, right, we've added up all of these. And again, it should equal 1, just like it did down here. So we end with a value of 1 for cumulative frequency. Now, as far as cumulative relative frequencies go, you would not really use them for word values because you're not really accumulating across a scale. But this was just illustrating the formula version. Right, this would be more appropriate for things that are progressively going from left to right, right? As we move across our graph, those values being added together make more sense. All right. Now, last but not least, what I'm going to talk to you about is the creation of a chart or a graph. So we're going to highlight just the data, which is not the total or any of the calculations per se that we did. Only things associated with values in the data. So the answers for the data were Manhattan, Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, Westchester, foreign, other unknown. No one responded with the word total, so it's not actually part of the data, right? It's what we use to calculate formulas that are related to the data, but it's not part of the data itself. This 6,225 is just the number of people that we asked. So highlighting just the data, and this is really important because everyone makes this mistake. Do not highlight the total when you're creating your charts or graphs. It's not part of the data set. So now if you go to insert up here, it gives you all the chart recommendations you could possibly use. I gravitate towards a bar chart, or known as a column, because then you can see the order of things. That's how I usually do it. And then you can see what's the most, what's the least. You might want to sort the data ahead of time so that it goes from most to least, so you can just see the order right away. Alphabetical order of words really doesn't tell you as much as putting them in the appropriate order. But as you can see, the highest one is here with the 2,913. Now, if you want to adapt this and make it prettier, you can just double click on whatever part of the graph you want to change. So here, maybe we want a different title, like residency status of students at Hostos might be a more appropriate title. So now you know what these are. It's the places that students that go to Hostos live. As you can see, this vertical right here stays below 3,000. And actually, one thing you could do is you can also make this bigger so you can see it better. I can move it over for you. Now it's a little bigger. You can also change if you want the font size. So when you click on here, you can go to Home. Home has the font size right there. Next to that, you could change the font type as well, but let's just change the font size so we can see it a little better. And now back to the graph itself. If we want this to change, I think it doesn't go above 3,000. If I double click on this, I can change the maximum, which is the biggest, to 3,000. And I can hit enter, and then this resizes automatically. And that's pretty much it. There's other pretty ways to edit the graph if you prefer to have a different style. You could pick any of these styles just by hovering over. Some are easier to read than others. Choose wisely, right, when you're doing a presentation. You want one people can read. I found that the contrast of light on dark actually works really well for people to see, or you want to just stay with the original one, which is a default for a reason. If you decide you don't want this chart, you can change the chart type over here, and you can turn it into a pie chart if you wanted. You go to OK. Again, this one's a little hard to read, so you might want to pick something else. Maybe this one's better. And again, here's a legend of what all the different colors mean, so you can see those. But again, this is why a bar graph I pick unless there's only like 2 or 3 answers, because the minute you get more answers, the color shades aren't contrasting enough for people to actually see. So I highly recommend changing the chart type back and sticking with a column. If you want, you can also make it this way. It's the same as a bar chart, but just sideways. So we're just going to go back to our original with this. And personal preference, I like it like that. So hopefully, so I'm going to do one more. We're going to go to tuition, which is this graph right here. And what we're going to do is we're going to try to turn this into a histogram. There is an automatic way for histograms to be made. We'll share that next time. But if you go to insert in the charts again, if you use histogram, some weird things happen. It changes the bin types and all that because this is already created to be a histogram based on the frequency distribution that's right here. If it's raw data, you can use the histogram here. If it's not raw data, this is actually a frequency distribution, it's not raw data, you're going to need to use a bar graph instead. Now, the difference between a bar graph and a histogram is the numeric scale at the bottom and the fact that the bars touch. So let's make this a little bigger. So the thing that's wrong here is the bars aren't touching. If you go to quick layout, it might also be on the side over here on the right. To do this, you can actually pick the one that is a histogram layout, which is layout number 8. That's one possibility. If you can't find that, the other thing you can do is you can click on the bars, and over here where the bar thing is, you can have a gap width, and you can change that gap width to 0. and that'll make them touch as well. And that's one of the easiest ways to get around it. You click on the bars, you change the gap width to 0, and now you have a much better, that is a histogram because they are touching. Again, if you change the type, because it's a bar graph, it'll undo that. So you'll have to redo the part where you change the width. And now you have them all touching again. So hopefully this is a good introduction for all of you. I hope it helps. If you have any questions, drop me a line by email and I'll get back to you and we can Zoom and discuss. All right. Have a great day.